Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast, presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We are part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Corey Chavous. He, of course, one of the all-time greats of Vanderbilt football. He is very active in the sports media business. He got to come see 3 days of practice last week. We talked in the last episode about offense. This time we'll talk defense and special teams. So I hope you enjoy this episode with my good friend, Corey Chavous. Corey Chavous joins me. This is part 2 of our podcast looking at Vanderbilt for the 22 football season, talking about what we saw in camp. We talked about offense in the first one. Tonight we will go into defense and special teams. Corey, thanks for being with me again.
Man, thanks a lot, man. I'm always excited to come back on and then we talk a little chop shop, I guess is what I like to call it, chop shop.
Absolutely. Well, what were your impressions on the defense when you saw Vanderbilt for 3 days?
I was pretty impressed. I guess the first thing I had told you was that I was impressed with the fact that John Howell was able to come in and implement what he's been able to do and incorporate it pretty seamlessly, it looked like to me. I don't know what you've seen through most of camp, but very impressed with his communicative ability and how the guys responded to him. And I think probably, Chris, for me, the biggest thing I look through is walkthroughs. The walkthroughs have to be loose, but they have to be intense. And I would say I was most impressed by their walkthroughs. A walkthrough will tell you a lot about how focused a team's defense is, because that's one of those periods where if offensively in a walkthrough, you're actually executing the play. So even if you're just kind of walking through the route, you still have the quarterback throw the football to the receiver, whereas defensively, it's about being in the right fit, the right gap, and almost about visualizing what you've actually already done either in practice or seen on film. And you really have to understand the adjustments that the defensive coordinator is making. And I thought they impressed during those periods.
Yeah, give me an example of some details that stood out to you in a walkthrough that maybe we wouldn't pick up on and why those things were meaningful.
Well, shifts. You know, how many times do you see a team shift in before the snap and the defense not be able to make the correct adjustment? And that was one of the things that I saw the defensive coordinator, the guy who I mentioned earlier, really emphasizing. I felt like it was how you would adjust to the shifts. So, you know, for the most part, I feel like that part. I think from that perspective, I think they're gonna be in good shape. You know what I mean? I think that's something that if you really look at what they're doing in terms of being able to adjust to the offense actually changing the formation before the snap, that's going to happen for you a lot of times in the SEC. And I think, Nick Howell has been probably, I guess, one of the he learned under Bronco Mendenhall, but I think the fact that he just understands really what and maybe how to attack an offense's protection schemes when you actually do pressure, I think that'll help the defense this year.
When you watched them play, what were the things that stood out as potential strengths?
Well, I think one of the things that stood out was I feel like Anthony Orji, when he's on top of his game, he's going to be able to cover a lot of ground in a lot of the different coverages that they may employ. I like a guy like Michael Owusu. He's somebody that in this defense can shine. It's a multiple defense, and you're going to be able to move guys around. I think one of the big things I like about Owusu is that he's also very efficient on special teams. I watched him a year ago in that facet of his game be pretty spectacular at times. I mean, he was a left guard on the kickoff return. He played the R5 on the kickoff team. He was a left guard on the punt team. And one of the things that, he comes from, he's got these athletic bloodlines, but he's got heavy hands. And so in this Howell-based defense, I think you're going to have guys who can set the edge, and you're going to have some guys who can set the edge with some length, who have that outside linebacker type frame and personality to a certain degree. He, along with, I think maybe the trump card in their defense is a guy that I think everybody is, relatively excited about. I know you've kind of mentioned, quite some time that you were wondering, I guess, like where he would end up in terms of, and I'm talking about DeRicky Wright. I feel like, what do you think about him?
Well, my suspicion, and I had no information on this going into camp, Corey, was that he was just too good of an athlete to keep off the field. And I just speculated that maybe he could land at that other safety spot because they were lacking experience there. 2 and 2 added up to 4 in this case, and that's what he's been playing. And I don't know what to make of him yet. The athleticism is there. He's been a little limited with an injury, I guess, in camp is a good way to say it. So I'm not sure entirely what he is when he unlocks all his potential. But having said that, it's looked good to me when I've seen him before. When I saw him last year, I guess in fall camp or was it spring practice the year before? I forget now. But point is, I've seen him make plays. I've seen his athleticism. That seems like a right fit for him, but it's still, I guess, a work in progress is a good way to say it. I'm not meaning that to say that he's lacking, but the fact is it's a new year. It's sort of a new role for him, and I'm very interested to see how that lands.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I want to see whether or not, I think what they think about him, I looked at him as a guy that was could potentially develop into something different, but I think and you can see some of the movement capability that he has. It's just about, whether or not that matches up against some of the smaller, quicker type receivers that you would have if you're going to, be in coverage at all. But I do think that there is some potential rush capability where he could be a matchup issue for running backs. So I don't know whether they're going to use him in that facet or not. But he presents an intriguing dilemma for offenses when he's on the field, particularly if you decide that you're going to go with 2 or 3 tight ends, or if you decide to tight ends, because now he can come in and he can kind of take out one of your tight ends. He can set the edge in the run game. He could possibly play off the hash. I think he gives the team a little bit of versatility, and I do like the way he could kind of fit in the role. I want to see Davion Davis get back. I don't know when that'll be, but I was as impressed with him as anybody in terms of just being able to almost bend like a linebacker at about 280 pounds, a leverage-based player. Not necessarily real long, but I think he could add a different dimension to their defense. And I think with the length they have, particularly when you talk about a guy like Malik Langham, he could be a good complement inside.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the line in a minute and talk about Davis and Langham and some other guys. But back to Wright, one other thing I liked about him, Corey, you don't see a lot of 6'4", 230-pound safeties for a defense that you look at and say, size might be an issue, especially with some injury issues. I don't know how much you make up having a bigger safety, but it doesn't hurt. And the other thing is, on a team that sort of lacks pass rushers in terms of what you get from them on the defensive line, I like those two things about DeRicky being in the lineup. Now, again, I don't mean to hijack this and make this a DeRicky Wright conversation solely, but those are two other things that I liked about that move.
Well, yeah, I actually agree with you, though, and that's one of the things that I was interested to see whether or not he'd be isolated in that particular role in terms of maybe being a designated pass rusher, and I'm not sure that that's going to happen. We'll find out as the season goes on. Again, Nick Howell is a very, very versatile in terms of what he likes to do defensively, and he's multiple. And so you kind of don't really know where you're going to get some of the pressure concepts. That's going to be a challenge, I think, for Hawaii in week one, a team shifting, not necessarily from an entirely new offensive scheme, but the run and shoot is going to be a little bit different, and they're going to be trying to get the ball out quick. So you're going to have some isolation situations for your offensive linemen. You got to make sure that you turn the protection the right way on third down. But I definitely think Howell is going to understand and have a pretty good feel for what they're going to do protection-wise. That'll be the thing to watch in week one.
Well, Corey, sticking on the back end there, and I'll get to linebackers in a minute because that's the next component of this. But I feel like one place where they've got a chance to be sneakily a lot better than people think is those safety spots, because we just talked about DeRicke and what he potentially brings. I think Max Worship has had a really good camp. In my mind, he's gone from just a guy to a guy that I think has really started to make some things happen. And then depending on what you call Jalen Mahoney, I think he's been sort of a nickel corner, but he almost plays more like a safety at times, and I think maybe has gotten some reps as safety. But if you consider those three guys, I love Mahoney. I just think that kid shows up. He's been good darn near every practice, and I think a lot of people, right hit the portal. You saw write-ups that talked about that, but I don't think you saw a lot of the people that wrote about the team in magazines and other places talk about him being back. So you throw in him, you throw in an improved Worship, and you throw in a Mahoney who I think has been good before and I think is primed to have his best year yet. I think that's an area where they're going to be maybe stronger than people perceive.
Yeah, I can see that. I think Mahoney is flat out a draft pick. So that's just I'll put that out there now. I thought he was I thought he was a competitive corner. I thought there were some times where his eyes got him into trouble, but I thought he established his jams from the outside in. I thought he sunk his weight to tackle and wrap tackle pretty efficiently. He would actually, he's a little bit fast reading through the three-step at corner. And sometimes you had to watch sitting on routes. That may not be quite as much of a problem. He's got a feel now inside a little bit of, he's trying to kind of measure how you're going to have to manage some of those routes inside. But the thing that I like about him is that there's not a difference in play speed down to down. And I think that's one of the first things you look for when you're evaluating a player is there a difference in the play speed down to down, whether or not they're right or wrong, because you're going to make up a lot of your wrongs by your play speed not changing. And I think that's the big thing with Mahoney and gives him an opportunity. He's 5'11", about 195 pounds. He's going to be one of those players, and I think the coaching staff is really accentuating his strengths to a degree. He's going to be able to shine in this Howell-based system better maybe even than some of the other guys he's had like Nick Grant, Joey Blunt at Virginia. So it'd be interesting to see how he does. But to your point about Maxwell Worship, former lacrosse player, Cardinal Gibbons High School, I like what he's done in terms of he's a mature in terms of getting it done in the classroom at a high level at a university that challenges you, SEC academic all honor roll. But last year I thought he had some false steps in quarters coverage. He's cleaned that up in camp. He's filled the alleys well. He's wrapped. He's been the most physical defensive player, period, at any position. He's made statements, and I agree with you.
Okay, let's talk linebackers. You talked about Anthony Orji, but next to him, I think a very intriguing set of guys battling for one spot in Ethan Barr and Kane Patterson. Both of them are different body types. Both of them bring different things. How do you see it shaking out in the reps in those two guys, and what do you think each brings to their defense?
Well, I think it helps that Langston is there, your little brother. You want to come play with him. I think that's a big deal. I don't care what anybody says. You can play it off, but when you want to show him how you can get it done, and then you want him to be proud of you, and then actually maybe compete with you at some point. So I think for when you bring somebody in like Kane, who had a chance to potentially. I watched the Clemson linebackers. He had a chance to play there. So coming here was a big deal. And I like some of the things he did in coverage last week. I also like some of the reactions that I saw when there was a chance for him to just maybe delay a little bit. But if he saw something, he went. I saw a couple of plays that I liked from that perspective. But it's difficult because you got a guy like Ethan Barr who he had 3 interceptions last year.
Yeah.
And to just take him off the field with those type of zone instincts. I even saw him look up a couple of routes and zone coverage, being able to match that final number 2 or number 3 receiver in zone. Barr just has a feel, and he's got excellent size. So can you take Barr off the field, bring this guy on? A lot of question marks. You can't take Orgy off. Gives you that safety like range at linebacker. So I really think it's going to be a challenge as to how you use Patterson and how you use Barr and when you use them and where.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that makes it interesting is I think Patterson's got some pass rush ability, but like you said, Barr did some things in coverage. I think in addition to the 3 interceptions, he had 4 breakups. I mean, you don't look at him and think a kid who can cover in the passing game, but he obviously did that.
Yeah, he did. And the question I have in terms of Barr, I really like some. To me, he looks like a 3-4 inside linebacker, which they run a lot of 3-man fronts. And that means that you're going to be able to be big enough to kind of deal with the guard if the guard is uncovered for your fans listening. A lot of times with some of these 4-3 alignments, you cover up the 3 technique. The 3 technique covers up that guard. And that allows maybe the will linebacker to not, have a little bit more room to operate. But when you're in any type of 30 front defense, which we consider 3 defensive linemen, a guy like him with his size, he can make some things happen. And then you go back to high school, he's always been a pretty instinctive player, over 300 tackles in high school. But one of the things that you want to do if you're the opposite team, week 1, get him off the field if you're a wide. You come out 4 wide receivers, you can potentially get him off the field. Who's the one that's making the calls on defense? Is it him? Is it Orgy? Yeah, I think both of them are capable, but if you can get him off the field, can you get their dime and nickel package on the field early? And then can those guys cover my number 3 and number 4 receivers? That's what Timmy Chang has to figure out.
Well, I think Barr did make the calls for them last year. That's an interesting point, is if you take him off the field, you're lacking that, although I'm sure someone can fill in, but that's an excellent point. Well, one other thing that you heard Clark Lee mention, and I don't know if you were here that day for it, but he said, when I asked him some of these questions about how do you split the time between those guys, he said, we got too many reps last year for Orgy and Barr. And I think he was right. They just didn't have any depth behind them that was playable probably at the level those guys were giving them. Now all of a sudden that turns into a much better situation. And Arrington Truesdale's a guy too that I think has been competent at times, and you're probably not going to see him a lot unless Orgy's hurt, but you'll see him a little bit more. I just think that there are options there when those guys are off the field are going to be better than they were a year ago by a good margin.
Yeah, they can be, and I think to your point, he also is, because he contributes on special teams. You don't have as much of a problem. About Truesdale, you're not going to have as much of a problem with him being able to get in the rotation at linebacker. You got more of a problem if a guy doesn't contribute on special teams at all. But when you look at Hawaii again, I think it's very important to kind of get a feel for. They've got some new guys they're going to be trying to bring into the mix, right? You lost Calvin Turner, who was probably the most versatile player, one of the most versatile players in Hawaii history. The entire offense centered around him. And if you're Vanderbilt, one of the things that I'm thinking is pressure this team, because they had a lot of problems with late wraparound blitzes a year ago. They linebackers in the A gap gave them problems against UCLA early in the season. And those things don't change. Regardless of a coach changing, there's something to be said about guys having problems dealing with stunts. And I think Vanderbilt can get after this team inside and maybe not have to bring as much pressure when you look at there was some miscommunication. You go look at the Oregon State game a year ago with Hawaii's offensive line, and there was miscommunication with their right guard and the right tackle picking some things up on a cornerback blitz. You got a cornerback blitz and coming free. I thought this team had problems a year ago with pressure concepts. Run and shoot or not, if you run and shoot it, your best offensive lineman for Hawaii is El Manning. He's pretty good, but he doesn't have an anchor. And so for me, you're going to try to blitz away from him and his side. And I think that's something that can help Vanderbilt in this game.
Was C.J. Taylor playing the day as you were there?
I didn't get a chance. You talking about the 6'5"?
I'm talking about the kid who's going to start at them in the anchor position.
Number 13?
Yes.
Yeah, I was impressed with him. I thought you were maybe referring to there was a quarterback, and I didn't know if that was his name. But no.
That's Walter Taylor. Yeah, that's another conversation. But yes,
but Taylor 13. Yeah, I was impressed with him. He's a versatile guy, and again, it's interesting you brought that up when we were talking about the run and shoot, Chris, because really those are the types of players that can cause problems for this football team in terms of Hawaii, as long as the short passing game, when a run and shoot offense, it's really about the short passing game, not necessarily the vertical passing game, because it's a timing, rhythm-based offense that consistently challenges you to be able to cover the width of the field as well as the vertical stretch. So a guy like him could become a big factor in week one.
Oh, I think he's going to be a big factor this season. They were high on him in the summer he had, and I needed to see it to believe it. He had a bad auto wreck last week, and he missed a few practices. In fact, if you saw the photos, you're just thankful the kid's not dead. But he's come back with a bang since you left town, Corey. He has made, in fact, I'm doing this Wednesday night. He made a couple of big plays today, made a couple yesterday. I just think this kid's been all over the field, and they've talked about how he just, like, if he's in the play, you hear him making noise and hitting kids, and that's a spot where, like, all of a sudden, you're questioning the talent a year ago. Now I'm going, well, I don't know what you do. I mean, I'm sure they've got the answer, and it depends on the situation, but if a lot of times he's on the field or Mahoney's on the field, if you're playing nickel, the anchor position seems to be the one that comes off. But I look at them, whichever alignment they're in, they've either got Mahoney on the field or him on the field, or maybe both of them at times. And just the way Taylor has come on in the fall, I just think that gives him another kid who can make plays for a team that really lacked them a year ago.
Well, I mean, to your point, I guess on 8/4/22, one of the things that impressed me about him was a feel on the goal line. And if you can do those types of things, if you can be productive in short yardage or those types of goal line situations, then that gives you more versatility when you're out in the open field, because you can do more things with that player. So I certainly understand where you're coming from with them. And I think that when it comes down to it, again, you go back a couple of days, even from there, in a red zone period, he showed up once again. So, and that's just from my notes during the week of practice. When you have guys continue to flash and you keep writing their names down, I don't know. That to me kind of makes me, kind of say, okay, well, let me kind of keep an eye on that guy. So I get your point.
Yeah, I've been keeping a lot of notes, and his name has been one that I've written down a lot lately. All right, shifting gears here, Corey, defensive line.
Something though, I do want to mention him.
Sure.
He's a little bit of a trump card for the defense, because he has an ability to be able to, at his size, seems like he's gotten even bigger and stronger. I mean, he looks like really what I would consider an NFL 4 technique, line up right over the tackle in a 3-man front. I thought I really enjoyed his matchup last year. ETSU, the right tackle, Tremont Shorts, he's now at LSU, struggled to disengage from him early, but I thought he got better playing with his hands later in the game. I saw him last week in some of the one-on-ones on a late delayed TE stunt in the defensive line, O-line drills. He ran over an offensive guard. He's heavy. I feel like he's I've seen him get his hands up when he's been at the right defensive end position before. He's a very interesting player that if the light completely comes on, I think he'll be surprised where he'll end up.
My audio broke up when you said the name. Who was that?
Nate Clifton.
Clifton, that's who I figured. I think Clifton's been better. I think they're limiting his reps, and I probably would too, because that's one of your big concerns right now, Corey, is they've got to get healthy there. We've not seen Davion Davis all camp. We've not seen Christian James. We have not seen Devin Lee. And now Braden Bapst, who I think could help them in spots maybe off the edge, is out for a while. And I think that's the thing everybody's watching is when do they get those kids back?
Well, James can one gap, and that means a guy that can shoot up the field and take a gap. He's about 275 pounds, right? And he's got pretty good height and length as well. Satisfactory hand usage, a little bit limited in the lower body, sometimes holding the point of attack, particularly at the he can play a little bit of the inside shade forward technique, defensive end position, decent stack and shed. I think he can challenge for more playing time. I'd like to see him be able to get on back in there because he can give you, again, the depth you're talking about.
Well, I think James could maybe help them at that end, too. I'm afraid they're a little light at that position right now. Well, I mean, Clifton is going to help them for sure, but I just think that they need a little more bulk on that line, and that he's been a guy who has, I think, been able to help them at different spots before.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. Now you want to have a guy that defensive, if you're playing a three-man front, you're in the SEC. So you're in the mini NFL. So what you want to have is a guy that's about 275 to 285 pounds, ideally, and still with some movement skill, because that allows you when you slide your fronts, they can play other positions on the line. You're not going to just always stay in a traditional three-man front. Use that three-man front and you move your outside linebackers all around, other defensive linemen to create various fronts so you can move the angles of the offensive line. So that is where having those two positions, some people describe them as defensive tackles, but they're really defensive ends in the three-man front. Those guys have to be the most versatile players in a three-man front because they've got to be able to play two or three positions effectively at all times.
Is this the year that it comes together for Malik Langham? This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing. It's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast because without it, this season would not be possible.
I think it has to. I really do. And the reason I say that is because he's got a coach in Larry Black who understands what not to do. So he's going to tell you what not to do. So if you take that coaching in, I think then you can begin to reach your full potential. With his capability, and even when I talk to him, I don't know that he really realizes how good he can be. I really don't. I mean, he's somebody that right now, again, we talked a little bit about, I guess, Essa Quatora. in terms of just looking the part. There's nobody that looks the part more than Malik Langham, but so what, right? Played the part. And I do think that you see the flashes, like, it's so interesting just watching him even run to the ball. I think he wants to be better, and I think he's shown effort, at least in the practices I was at. And you've seen that in spots. I didn't watch him in the games last year and feel like, he was dogging it at all. But I just believe there's another level he can reach. And I think that's what Coach Black, who's an excellent coach, is trying to get him to get to.
Well, the other guy in that injured bunch we've not talked about is Devin Lee. And I think he was certainly going to be in their rotation before the injury. And I think they're hoping to get him back for the opener. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But I looked at him. I've watched him. He's doing a lot of strength stuff just while he's on the sidelines. And he just looks and seems to, just in the things I see him do, have that level of size and strength that they don't get on those inner defensive linemen usually. And I think that's a piece that could really help them where they could use it if they can get him back and healthy.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I mean, I think it comes down to, if you get him back, what happens then to Miles Cecil, though, right? I mean, I don't know what your take on that in terms of, how does that all mix in? Again, they're a little bit different. I think Lee's a little longer, but maybe that will help. Maybe that rotation will help. I do believe you got to get enough snaps as a defensive lineman. One of my big jobs for most of my career was having to fit with the defensive lineman, having to communicate with the defensive lineman, having to make sure that we got the right close call, the right strength call. And then when I got to fit in the gap, making sure that I feel correctly to get that double team off of that defensive lineman. So there was a lot of communication between me and the defensive lineman. And there is a rhythm you have to get with the other players defensively. And I understand that now in college football, there's really a two deep. There's no more, and I'm not even just talking about the defensive line. Typically with some teams that I've covered, Chris, there's a two deep period. There's 20 players playing on defense. So that's really what that's been always my biggest question, even when I watch teams, is where's that rhythm at with the communication in terms of strong right, close left, you know what I'm saying? Boy, boss, you know what I'm saying? Before it's that, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Boy, I mean, all those different calls you got to make, how are those defensive linemen reacting to those calls?
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, because a lot of these guys aren't going to be playing together maybe till the opener. If it works out, because, I mean, here we are a couple weeks out from the opener, and again, we got 4 guys we're discussing being back. But the communication stuff aside, because I think Cecil and Lee will play the same spot. I think that Devin Lee, most likely, just based on body type, is probably more of a, you use him in the rundowns, 3rd, 4th, and short. And Cecil, to me, is smaller. Not that he's a small guy, but he's probably not as big as Devin Lee, but he's got a motor, and I'm thinking maybe you use him to get after it in passing downs and Lee more for running downs, and maybe that's the way those guys split.
Yeah, well, I think Cecil is probably going to be at his best as a run defender in this conference. Now, he's good. Now, I think he can win, maybe cross in the face if you stun him, slant him, and maybe be able to beat a guard or a center across the face. Whether he has a secondary pass rush counters to be able to engage an offensive lineman and get off, that didn't really show up to me a lot at Cal Poly. So we'll see. I think there's some leverage at the point of attack with them. But again, even if you're talking about a pass rush, it's all going to be about the one gap penetration. If you're going to be really to have some production from him in terms of just getting up the field as a quarterback hurry type guy, hasn't really gotten a lot of guys on the ground as of yet, then that's going to be about one gap. And that might be more about some of the line stunts and twists or things like that you're running.
Well, the one thing that I think we both agree on, I think we know where the future of that defensive line is, because goodness. Wataha, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. We've talked about him a little bit and just oozing with ability.
You said Quataha? I guess I've been calling him Quatara.
I think it's Wataha, but I don't know that any of us are sure. But
man, I apologize. I had no idea. I take a lot of time with the pronunciations but I will say this: you need to enunciate his name correctly
because you're going to be calling it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he is something else. I tell you, man. I know that it's got to be certainly a tough adjustment for him to come over, but I like some of the stuff that I saw from him last week. He's physically right now. He's ready to play in the SEC.
No doubt.
Now mentally, we'll see, because there's a lot of guys that are physically ready to play in the SEC or Pac-12 or Big Ten, whatever it might be. But mentally, are you ready? And I think that's the big question.
Yeah, that's definitely a question. I mean, the ability's there, and the way that I've talked him up on the podcast and on our boards, people are probably thinking he's going to go out and be all SEC from day one. That's not what I'm saying because of everything you said, but I'm just saying ability-wise, my goodness, when he's got the mental part down and everything, whenever that is, no question the physical part is there.
Yeah, and I think when you're that big and you're more physically, I wouldn't necessarily say, you can't say you're physically dominant yet, but you're more physically superior in terms of just on the hoof than those other guys. That gives you a little bit more confidence than people may realize.
All right, let's talk about the star position because I think that's where a lot of their pass rush is going to have to come from. They moved Elijah McAllister over to defensive end. Miles Capers seems to have the edge right now starting at that position, but you've seen Owusu play there too. Darren Agu, the freshman, is really talented too, and I thought at first maybe a little light to play, but I think he's been too productive to sit down. That's going to be an interesting spot to watch.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think Javon Hayes done a good job with the position in terms of being able to make them all feel like there's a role. And I think when you see them get in and they rotate, they all play with the same energy. The guy for me will be Capers. I believe that what you've seen from him so far, he's got a chance, and I don't think he even knows it yet, Chris, but he's got a chance to be a star. And you've got to believe it. You got to buy into it. You got to completely understand what they're trying to coach you up on, and understand that the sky is absolutely the limit. Now, with that being said, there's very few players on the team that I'm as impressed with as Owusu when you're going down into R5 on the kickoff. You're the left guard on the kickoff return, the left guard on the punt. Again, already has graduated. All those things work in your favor. And he's also got pretty heavy hands. I think we talked about him a little bit earlier. So that helps out as well. I really feel like McAllister moving where he's moved to, and they've moved him around a little bit, I think that'll help. And I believe that eventually he'll start to get a better feel for those positions. Been a little bit different for him so far in camp, kind of playing, some different roles.
Let's talk special teams. I don't think I even have to tell you where we're going to start there. I'll just let you go.
Well, you must be talking about, I guess, the punter, right? Hay-Ball?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that he's a potential, with the directional capability, a potential draft pick. A little bit inconsistent the one day me and you watched him in terms of losing a couple, but even if I were to go back to my notes that I had of him at FAU, pretty consistent in terms of that catch and kick time for me when it hits your hand and when it gets off. Some people look at it snap to kick time. That's how a lot of special teams coaches look at it. For me, I look at it catch and kick. That isolates the punter's operation aside from the actual snapper, who actually the long snapper is pretty good too, Wesley Schelling. So, but that's going to help him because he can get down in roughly that .72 long snap range. That'll help out Hayball, who's left-footed, which is very difficult to gauge. The directional capability, I think some of the punts spiral downward, a little bit of a funny spin. I think he's pretty solid on his drop punts. Got an excellent special teams coach in Justin Lustig. So all the things kind of match up for him in terms of it working out. It's just going to be about consistency. I think that's going to be the big thing for him.
What else stands out to you on special teams before we go to the mailbag?
Well, I think from a special teams perspective, I'm interested to see the kickoff return game. I think in kickoff coverage and punt coverage, this team will be very good. Can somebody develop into a dynamic kickoff returner? I think that's something that wins a game or two. That's often underrated. Now, when you look at this team a year ago, you had Johnson and Bodie played a little bit. I don't know if is Bodie really a kickoff returner? You know what I'm saying? I think that's the big thing. I believe that Rocco Griffin can give him something at that position. I don't know exactly how they rotated it so far. I was only there for a couple of days. How have they rotated that returner position so far? I know they got I think they've got the freshman who's the 4-3 guy, McGowan back there, right?
Yeah, I mean they've narrowed it to 3 or 4 guys. I think my expectation is McGowan is the guy that probably leads them in return yards if you combine punts and kickoffs.
Yeah, he's got to be a little bit more secure. I watched him muff a punt the first day I was there, so you got to be a little bit more secure when it comes to ball security. Period. Particularly if you're returning punts, that'll crush you. I mean, the reason why I say that is because I muffed some punts my sophomore year in school. One muff punt led to a key turnover against Arkansas, a game we lost. And then I fumbled a kickoff return against Notre Dame that got returned for a touchdown. So for me, I personally understand how much those things make a big difference at Vanderbilt. We can't afford in a special teams game not to win. And I made it a point by the time I became a junior to become one of the best in the country returning kickoffs and never take any play for granted on that side of the ball.
You ready for the mailbag?
No.
Well, I'm going to ask you anyway. So there. Today's mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Bobby 2 times says, how do you evaluate the corners on this team, and is there any NFL talent you can see? He says at corner or anywhere else on the team. Let's focus on the corners there. We didn't really talk about those, and that was not intentional.
Well, yeah, I think B.J. Anderson has NFL talent, long, strong. I thought the days I was there, Kenny, he's recovered pretty well from the injury. I think he's got a chance to play there. Tyson Russell, you can go back to out of Plantation, back to some of his high school film. He had the same type of stuff you're seeing now in terms of instincts. He's got pretty good size. He's a thicker corner who can plant and drive and has very good eye speed. And we always talk about foot speed. We rarely talk about eye speed. And Tyson Russell has quite a bit of that. I like Justin Harris as a potential contributor. He can play safety or corner. I think when you go down some of the other guys that I think are a little bit underrated, one guy is not necessarily a corner, but John House can give you some versatilities from Nashville at safety because he can cover a little bit. He actually returns kicks as well. We've already talked about Jalen Mahoney. I think he's a draft pick. I think Quantavious Gaskins, they kind of call him Gumbo, about 6'1", 190 out of Atlanta. I like some of the things I've seen from him. Now, he's going to have to be a little bit more consistent in terms of the hand placement and press and continue to get a feel for playing off. Yeah, but I think Coach Jackson does an excellent job of working those things and talking about those things and talking them through reps. These are all guys. Sani Aloa, and he's a pretty impressive guy as well. Trudell Berry. I mean, they've got a lot of talent at defensive back. They've done an excellent job recruiting that position. But I guess maybe Jadis Richard, that's the guy I didn't get to see a lot. Apparently, Chris, he's been the best guy maybe out of all these guys in camp, right?
Yeah, he was the guy that the first few days at camp looked the most likely of all the true freshmen to play. Now, he's got, I think, some kind of an injury, so that's to be determined. But I thought that he might even see the field like in dime packages. So that's one to watch, but I think that's a little to be determined based on the fact he's not been out there in a bit.
Ugachukwu, in my opinion, is going to continue to challenge for playing time all year because he loves the game. He's got long arms. He's quick. I think he has pretty good recovery speed. He can make up for some of his mistakes in coverage. He's a player that kind of keep your eye on. Certainly, Jamison Wharton and Trudell Berry, maybe they're a year away. I don't know. They have everything you look for in terms of traits. But Ugachukwu kind of caught my eye a little bit when I was there during the week, and I'm pretty impressed with really just what he put forth.
Yeah, Wharton is a guy that's gotten some rave reviews at times too. No, here's what drives me crazy, and I griped you about this last week while we watched. A bunch of those freshmen cinch their jerseys and push them up. And I'm sitting there watching with binoculars, and I cannot tell what's 28 or 38 or 29 because they're all wearing their jerseys up. So my ability to evaluate those kids has been really difficult because I can't tell who's who half the time. Or not half the time, 95% of the time.
Yeah, well, I like that part of it because that means that they're concerned about swag. If you're not concerned about swag, as they call it now, back in my day, it was just called, just who's getting about it. But you got to be able, your dress code has to be right. And so that's good that you don't even know the numbers because that means they're concentrating on the right thing. You got to feel like, I think that contributes to just how you look, does have something to do with how you play. You want to have a tight dress code, particularly at corner, as long as you hit. If you got a tight dress code and you don't hit anybody, that's a weak dress code to me. But you get my point.
That's all great, but I focus on what's good for me, Corey. I can't tell them apart, and that's a problem.
So the dress code bothers you?
As long as it's impeding my ability to cover them, yes. So, but you know,
so you're not worried about dress code. You're worried about being able to see the number, like
right
down.
People are like, "How does this guy look?" I'm like, "I'm not sure. I'm not sure which guy he is because he looks just like the guy next to him from 300 feet away through binoculars because of the way they're wearing the jerseys." But anyway, it's annoying, kind of amusing. But in any case, they do have a lot of guys who I think can really run, who are new.
Yeah, and they can really run, and I didn't think they lacked instincts, which points back to Barr and Simmons and his recruiting staff. You get a bunch of guys who can run in a straight line, but can they? How do they panic when they're beating off the line of scrimmage? Stuff like that is important to kind of look at too.
Yeah. Let's see. The next question comes from Viewperior. What would be your NIL strategy if you were Vanderbilt? Boy, we could probably talk about that for a while.
Well, I think the NIL strategy has to be, and you've got to kind of target, I believe, because it's not just about being able to just say I can go after everybody because everybody wouldn't be able to get into school, right? So that's the first part of it. And then once you actually have identified those people who have maybe just, I don't know, it have to be a 4.6. I guess you can have a 5.0 GPA now coming out of high school, Chris. But finding those guys that are in that range and being able to offer something from that perspective. You know what I'm saying? Including money, I believe that I think that's going to be the big key. You know, how does that all kind of equate and maybe have some type of parallel to it? I think that's something that you've got to kind of consider.
Similar question here from Vandy Fitz. Corey, taken all together with NIL and the Wild West of limited to no transfer restrictions, has Lee's Vandy program been put in a better or worse position relative to our competition? I know we're at the bottom of the SEC apple cart, but do the new rules make it easier to catch up or harder for Vanderbilt not to lose more ground?
Well, it's about, I believe, also finding the guys that slipped up that were overlooked with your NIL money in FCS. That's a big question. I'm going to answer both of the last two questions with this. Every year during the draft, I see these players that are completely overlooked when it comes to, and a lot of the times, some of them academically as well, when it comes to FCS football. So the NIL money is not just going to be able to say, okay, we're going to just have NIL money for the guys coming out of high school. It's going to have to be concentrated on the FCS players who are elite. You can compete for those guys. If they got good grades and they're elite and they can get into school, you got to be able to go out and find those players. That's going to be the key. That negates having to compete with some of the NIL high school players coming out, because you may not be able to compete with, you know, what people are offering some of those players coming out. And maybe you don't compete for Jordan Addison, right? But can you at least compete with the better players in FCS football or Division II? And can those players come in, and are they that elite at those levels that they can come in and compete at the SEC level? That's kind of where I think you also have to take a look at NIL money.
Okay, the next one. Let's see.
I don't think you agree with that, Chris, right?
Well, no, I don't. I just don't know what to make of it all, to be honest, Corey. I don't think that's a bad answer. It's one I hadn't thought of.
Well, yeah, that's Isaiah Land at Florida A&M.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I just don't. I don't know where this is going. I mean, I think the sense that I get is it's not going to go on like it is forever, and maybe not that much longer.
When you say forever, what do you mean?
I think there's eventually going to be restrictions on it. I've heard that.
I agree with that. I really don't. And what I'll say about that is, I don't think there'll be restrictions, because unless you're going to start restricting the coach's availability to leave after one. Remember, I was at Vanderbilt in 1994. Jerry DiNardo left after a 5-6 season where he lost the last game of the season 65-0. That is what has enabled all of this to grow into this big mushroom that just keeps getting bigger. So I think that has really been the big problem. And remember, the coaches' salaries kept getting bigger.
Yeah. So
that's really where this all evolved from. That a guy that goes 5-6 and loses 65-0 gets the LSU job. You know what I mean? So what we're really discussing here is a much bigger landscape, and particularly when it comes to guys. A lot of these guys that are transferring, don't forget, are still aiding those schools because they get the degrees. And that helps the scores that you have in terms of you get degrees that actually helps your final ranking academically before they leave. A lot of people are forgetting about that part of it as well. So there's a lot of different factors in play here.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't have any issue with kids getting paid, not at all, and I haven't for a while. My thing is just more like when just one school can just outbid everybody for players, and that's, you know, the determining factor in where all these kids are going. I've heard, you know, I think there's some sentiment that you may end up seeing something like congressional regulation with the salary cap kind of thing.
Well, Vanderbilt can compete at that level. There's enough money at Vanderbilt to compete from the NIL level. Let's don't make any mistake about that at all.
Yeah.
So that's not an excuse. In fact, that could actually be an advantage for Vanderbilt. You know, there's no way we're going to sit up here and talk about we're 14th academically by U.S. News and World Report and then say we don't have enough money to go NIL. This is more about administration letting the reins off and saying we want to compete and giving Clark Lee and his staff the correct opportunity to go out and be able to go after who they need to go after. Because you can do it in every sport, not just with Clark Lee. It could be with, whether it's with Corbin. I was just watching Kyle Nevin, Baylor infielder, outfielder, first baseman. Oklahoma went and got him, but the Dodgers drafted him in the 11th round. And then the Dodgers said, you know what, we're not going to let you go to Oklahoma, even though you transferred from Baylor. They gave him $397,000, and he left and went to the Dodgers as an 11th round pick. So don't give me this, we can't do it. Yeah, we can do it. You just got to put more money out there. And we have the money at Vanderbilt. Yeah. It actually works to our advantage, NIL.
Well, it should. I don't know that it has right now, but let me ask you. Well, go ahead.
That again goes back to, Chris, are we going to make the commitment to athletics?
Yeah.
We've made a big commitment, was it, how much, $300 million?
Maybe closer to $4 million. I mean, with inflation, who knows now, but yes, it's a lot of money.
So if you're going to invest that much, don't stop there.
No,
right?
I agree. And I think their strategy is going to try to be competitive and not let it cost them kids, especially as it pertains to retaining them.
Right. Well, that makes sense. But the retaining process, if somebody wants to leave, let them leave. There's more players out there than you think. And I think that's the thing. For example, I was talking with Coach Blazek the other day. We were talking about Dylan Redunz. I think he's with the Titans now, second-round pick. Get a guy like him. You know what I'm saying? A guy with a second-round pick, North Dakota State. You got to go out and get – you find those players that are good players at the FCS level, and you go out and say, no, we're going to go get this guy. They got a guy out there right now, Cody Mock. We were talking about him. Another tackle that's probably going to be not quite as long as Redunz or even Cordell Volson, who came out from there. But, again, I'm just mentioning guys at the FCS level who are known names. Eric Barriere last year at Eastern Washington, maybe not even an SEC quarterback. But you've got to be able to find who actually translates to this conference. And the evaluation piece is still in place.
Well, I actually like your answer, and where that makes sense for Vanderbilt is, the talented kids that they get, they're kids that might grow into players that could play at Georgia and Alabama, but it's going to take 2 to 3 years of development, whereas the kids Alabama and Georgia get are plug and play from the minute they get to campus in a lot of cases. Now, where I'm not going to say I have a problem with your answer because I don't. I think it's a great answer, but are they going to? I guess here's where I'm going, Corey. Are they going to be? Is this just going to be just like high school recruiting, where, I guess a better way to phrase it is: are they going to be more locked in on those guys you think than LSU, Alabama, Georgia, or are those schools going to be pursuing those kids at that rate too?
Well, of course they're going to be pursuing, but you can't get everybody. If you're going to go get Jermaine Burton and Tyler Harrell and Tyler Steen, if you're Alabama, you can't. There's only so many scholarships. Don't forget, COVID-19 is going to run out at some point.
Yeah.
So you're going to start recruiting. Those kids are going to roll out. There's not going to be quite as many scholarships available. And if there are more those scholarships available, then you have to be able to go find somebody at these other schools. And if they are available, they're going to get the Tyler Harrell. And while they're doing that, can you find somebody better than Harrell to come in to Vanderbilt? I think that's the key. Now, Harrell, again, is the guy at Alabama from Louisville, reportedly. Well, I know his trainer and quite well, and he does run 4.1 or 4.2. But you've got to be able to find a receiver who's a lot better than him. And there are guys that are out there, trust me. I promise you. There's the kid from Central Arkansas that played the last couple of years. I actually evaluated him, and he's a pretty good player. He ended up, I believe, transferring out, and he was one of the better players at the FCS level. Those are the types of players that you got to be able to go out and get, Chris.
Well, there would literally probably not be another person on this earth that knows that better than you do. I guess this is where I'm putting it together in my mind, right? I guess the assumption that I'm making when I hear you talking is that you're saying LSU, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, those schools are going to spend their time and energy scouring the FBS guys and maybe not put in as much time on the FCS guys as, say, Vanderbilt might, and that's where they get an edge.
Well, I think that's a good point, what you're making. You're saying that, okay, you've got a chance to, like, go out and get the guy that I'm talking about from Central Arkansas. What I'm really saying is, no, you cannot let them win on those guys. You might be able to say, give up Tyler Harrell, but you got to make sure that, hey, if I'm going to give up Tyler Harrell, then I'm not going to go give up the kid from Central Arkansas, right? Those are the types of things you got to be able to do if you're going to be able to continue to, I guess, use the NIL money to your advantage. That's more of my point.
What do you know about the collective that Jason Burns is heading up?
Not much at all.
Okay, yeah, nobody seems to. So, yeah, I don't mean that in a snide way. I just I don't know much about it.
Right. I mean, well, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like that's something that every school has a collective now? This isn't some secret.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about, that and what it can actually mean?
Well, I mean, they're obviously late to the party, but you have to. I mean, again, I'm not against any of this stuff. It's just, unfortunately, while they're, and again, I don't mean to be snide to them, but while they're building facilities they should have built 20 years ago, that's taken up a lot of the energy that could have been getting a head start on this.
Yeah, and for me, I think when you're talking about the collective, let's say you get money from all these different alumni, right? But it really is going to come down to how much does Vanderbilt really care about athletics.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the bottom line. At the end of the day, like, that's what the collective is all about, is how important is it? Because there is what we've seen at Vanderbilt is what we have witnessed over the last 10 years, particularly just some of the games me and you have been to in baseball. We've been to so many Vanderbilt games that we've seen each other at over the last decade.
Yeah,
we've seen a national championship. Now you can say it's baseball or whatever, but that's discounting the fact that LSU doesn't have tradition in baseball, that an Arkansas wouldn't have a recent tradition in baseball, that if you start going through the South Carolina didn't win a national championship in 2011, 2012. If you're just going to discount that, then that gives you an excuse for NIL with Vanderbilt in football. But if you don't discount what we just said, and you were covering South Carolina during that run and all that stuff, I don't even know if I think those are the correct years. But my point being, particularly if you go back to the 80s with LSU, there's so much history with baseball with other teams in this conference, and before the NIL came along. So I do believe that because of what you've seen Vanderbilt do in baseball, that can really be mirrored with football.
What do you think the appetite is among former players to contribute to the collective?
I think there could be an appetite. You got to just imagine, okay, you got a lot of players that I wouldn't say a lot of players. The players that we've had that have played in the league had longevity, maybe more longevity than other teams in the conference, quite frankly. So maybe that helps in terms of what they could bring to the table. But I don't think that needs to be the focus of the, okay, sure, I can give money, other players can give money. But the real money at Vanderbilt, if what you're saying is that you're Vanderbilt and you haven't given the money up to this point, right, Chris, is that the money should come from the people outside of athletics.
Yeah.
That people are the ones you have to recruit to really, I guess, ingratiate them into the NIL collective. You know what I'm saying? To a degree. Yeah.
But right now the money has to come from the outside, but I think part of the debate that I was getting at is it may move a different direction to where it comes from the schools themselves directly.
Now, when you say that, clarify.
Well, I mean, there's been talk of congressional regulation. You had a Supreme Court justice make a comment on the business model having basically been, more or less illegal. I'm putting words in his mouth, but the sentiment is that eventually Congress may get involved. And I mean, I think what I'm driving at, Corey, is the thought is you're going to see something that's regulated in terms of how much money each school can spend. And that given that these players are kind of looked at as employees of the schools, that would open the door maybe for the schools to fund a lot of this themselves. And I'm sure they would obviously solicit donors from alums and the places they would normally get them. But the point is, I think that the feeling I get is that the structure of this may eventually change. Now, where I don't know how they fix it is what you do and how that integrates with Title IX. Because that's the big thing that's the really complicating factor. But I've just heard a little bit of private chatter on this, and I get the sense that it's not going to stay the way that it is structured forever, and there's going to be some more regulation or something along those lines to where everybody's more on the same playing field with the resources they can put into it. Because it's like Mike Leach said at Media Day, I don't know if you heard it, but he said, imagine if you go to the NFL today and you uncap all the salaries and you make unlimited free agency year to year. That's basically what you've got in college sports, and that's just not sustainable.
Well, I think that's true, but I think one of the things that you also have that Sean Clifford, a guy who I've spent some time with at Penn State, very, very. I remember one time I was talking with him when I was doing a call with Penn State at one point, a couple years back, and he knew all about puts and calls years ago. And I was like, wow, this kid is impressive. And his unionizing attempts. What that suggests is that if you're going to say what Mike Leach said, that you're not understanding that there is not a union for most of these kids.
Right.
You start comparing the NFL, we have a union. I was a part of the union. So my point being, don't compare. Of course, that's what you created because you don't have to now allow them to unionize, and then you can make that argument that he's making. But without that unionization, you cannot make that argument.
Yeah, I think it's going to.
You understand what I'm saying there? I just want to make sure.
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, it's just so complicated, and Title IX is. It would be a lot easier to predict, I think, if it weren't for Title IX. I don't know how that part gets handled.
Well, I mean, so explain that a little bit deeper.
Well, okay, let's say that we have some sort of ruling by which we say, okay, every team gets, I don't know, $1 million a year in NIL money to use for football, and nobody can go over that cap. Mm-hmm. That's great, and that solves the problem of, finding competitive balance where, the rumor was Texas A&M paid $30 million for its recruiting class last year. That amount has been in dispute, but the fact is that's roughly $30 million more than Vanderbilt paid for its last year, I think. And so the point is, you got two teams in a conference that are playing on a very uneven playing field. That would solve it if it's regulated and everybody's playing on the same field. But then how do you do that? And with Title IX, you say, well, we're going to allow the schools to pay the football players, but if we've got equality, they have to pay the women's athletes the same money. Well, that's when you start running into problems of really being able to afford it. And that's where I wonder, how is that resolved? Because obviously, no offense to women, athletes, but the market values for football and whatever those other sports are not exactly equivalent.
Let me ask you something. If you're at South Carolina and you got Asia Wilson, would you create about $150,000 to get her to come to South Carolina?
I mean, you might. Was it Texas Tech last week that had a booster that underwrote $25,000 for every player?
I mean, now who was that again? I'm sorry.
Texas Tech women's basketball. But I mean, I think these are outliers, don't you?
Asia Wilson at Texas Tech women's basketball. Asia Wilson's maybe the best player in the WNBA right now. My point, when she was at South Carolina, she completely changed the face of that program to a large degree, and that's why they're doing what they're doing now under Don Staley. So my point being, when you have certain athletes, they demand a little bit more, and so that'll break down Title IX to a degree, because Aja Wilson transcends men's or women's sports to a degree. The way that Bryce Young may transcend men's or women's sports. So I think that's where, again, the unionization has to come into play, whether it be for men or women in college sports, so they can make sure that they protect everyone else. Because there's always going to be some players that just have more intrinsic value. Yeah. And those players are going to get more money. And I think that's the thing that you're kind of walking a fine line with there, Chris, in terms of saying we're going to regulate. Well, you can't regulate the individual's earning power. And that's really what this is all about in the first place. That's like you saying, okay, a coach has won, and then James Franklin, you just can't go to Penn State until you do this or that. No, I mean, he won and his earning power increased. So that's the reason why Penn State offered him a job. Same thing, Clark Lee. He wins here, his earning power increases. And that's the reason why there were coaches who were on the staff that ended up leaving, because they had increased their stock even through a tumultuous season, because they were better in terms of better viewed after their performance in whatever facet it may have been. In Jesse Hunter's case, for example, got 13 interceptions. Nobody really realizes that Vanderbilt had 13 interceptions. So it's varying degrees of how people's, I guess, performance is evaluated, but the intrinsic value of the individual is more what this is all about to me.
Right. Well, when you say union, I was thinking football players, but you're thinking this is union of college athletes.
Well, no, union of every sport. I think
right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, no question. I mean, so women's basketball, they definitely need a union. Same thing, men's basketball. You can have, or maybe they could unionize together. I'm not sure exactly how that will work. I don't think the WNBA and I think there may be some correlation there with the WNBA and NBA. I think those players' unions are separate, though. I'm so proud of what the WNBA has done in terms of their stances. They've been able to kind of go outside of what the norms are in terms of what you would expect from the quote-unquote staying within the box. And they've been able to really spur awareness nationally with so many different subjects in terms of just not society. So again, I really believe that unionization is important when it comes to your individual's earning power and that capability to protect that. And I think that's what Sean Clifford was trying to get done at Penn State.
No, that's a really good point, and I think it makes it a little bit easier to see it come together when you put it like that, which is something I really had not connected the dots on.
Yeah, I think the thing that I agree with you about from the regulatory standpoint, if it is regulated, Chris, which is something you mentioned, it's the same thing as cryptocurrency. If you regulate cryptocurrency, then what you're going to do is actually substantiate its value.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with the regulation. So, you come back and you regulate what you're doing with, this NIL money and how it's being distributed, and Texas A&M can't give 30, Vanderbilt give 1. That's fine. Because you can regulate it all you want to. You're only going to increase the value of the athletes and drive their price up, if you start regulating. Yeah. And I think that's the same thing that has happened in a lot of different things that we've seen through society.
Well, I have a feeling we'll talk about that subject again maybe later in the year as things develop. But let me hit you with a couple more before I hit the bed for the night. Believe 22 asks, what is Coach Clark Lee's ceiling here? An occasional bowl, an annual bowl, or 8+ wins each year?
Well, I think his ceiling is beyond. It could be, okay, let's say he gets 3 more classes like this, right? Okay. When I look at Notre Dame getting to the playoffs, And I think a lot of times what Clark Lee sees is Notre Dame, which a lot of people don't realize is Notre Dame is one of the tougher schools academically, nationally. Nobody really thinks about Notre Dame like that necessarily, but traditionally, probably in the top 25 to top 30, very similar academic requirements to Vanderbilt. Now, they've got a full stadium. They've got the tradition. They've got names going all the way back to Joe Montana. You've got so many different historical references, whether it's 1988, Tony Rice. You don't necessarily have that as much here at Vanderbilt. But I still think in terms of the city and how he sees how the city could melt into a similar trajectory, so to speak. Because remember, Notre Dame, people forget about the mid-'80s with Jerry Faust and Notre Dame going down to Miami and being kind of average for a while. After they won the 1979 Cotton Bowl, Chris, they were average for a while before they kind of picked it back up in the late 80s. They were the Jerry Faust years where they were respectable, but not necessarily as good as some people maybe even thought that they were. You know, that's back when I'm talking about Steve Berline and those years. So I think really Clark Lee believes that Vanderbilt may be able to get and make that jump that Notre Dame did in the late 80s, specifically 1988, Major Harris versus Tony Rice in the 1988 Fiesta Bowl.
You know, I think in some ways they actually have more leeway and flexibility with admissions and on some administrative things than Notre Dame does.
Well, that's pretty interesting to hear and pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, I've always maintained I don't think their academic restrictions out of high school are as restrictive. Forgive me for being repetitive there, but as people maybe, I mean, yes, every school in the league can get in better players than they do, but at some point you've got to say that hey, they've got to do the classwork here, which you know is not easy, and I don't think that the bar is set at an unreasonable spot given all the factors here.
Yeah, and I don't think it's unreasonable either. In fact, for me, I did 4 internships while I went to school here, and the schoolwork was not, you've got to get the schoolwork in. So I do believe that you can do both and be multifaceted. But I agree. I think that it's doable. I think you have at least when I was here, the support system was very good. One person that, I haven't even said in years that I would love to say her name, Sharon Shields, amazing. Somebody like her just supported so many of us as athletes. And those are the types of people that want to see you succeed. And I'm sure there's still people like that here now.
Okay, last one before we end this. GoDoors94 asks, what are your recollections of the 97 game against LSU in Nashville? Was the team extra motivated to play DiNardo? And what made the defenses in 96 and 97 so special?
Well, I think we were extra motivated to play DiNardo, number one. We felt like we were building something. We were 5-5. I mentioned the 65-0 debacle earlier in the broadcast with Chris. But what made those defenses special was up the middle. I think any defense or football to me is played up the middle of the field. You got to have a good running back. You got to have a good quarterback, a good center, a good Mike linebacker, a good defensive tackle, and a good safety. Those are where you win football games. And we had the best linebacker in the country, in my opinion, at the time, in Jamie Duncan. And then those other guys developed around him, Anthony Jordan, Carlton Hall. Carlton Hall had a spectacular 1997 season. I thought Glenn Young was very underrated. Ryan Alls up the middle at nose tackle was incredible. And I felt like that's the reason why those defenses, particularly the 97 with Alls, we just had a lot of good players. I felt like I think everybody in our secondary played in the league. So that alone, and then all the linebackers played in the league. So I thought there was some talent. Rock Batten, who's a coach at Innsworth High School, I spent some time with him last week, was just a phenomenal player. He was absolutely phenomenal and would have played in the NFL, no question, if he hadn't gotten hurt the next year after I left, we came in together. So you had the chemistry there, and we were aggressive. We played predominantly man coverage, all-out blitzing team. Woody Woodenhofer, defensive coordinator with the Steel Curtain in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Norm Parker, one of the greatest defensive minds in Big Ten history. The names go on and on. Ryan Aiken, Perry Fuel ended up being a NFL defensive coordinator. I'm forgetting a lot of names, you know what I'm saying? But again, it was a hell of a coaching staff and some good players.
Corey, loved our time together. I know we're planning to do, I hope, a bunch of these during the season. Thank you for your time. Before you leave, tell people about Draft Nasty and all the things that you do there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You always give me a shout, man, and you've been such a big part of us when we've worked together in the past, just the knowledge you've been able to share with me. And again, we cover all the sports, and a lot of the time it's just draft recaps. That's where I really take a lot of time with draft recaps for Major League Baseball, because it's after it's over with, and then you kind of go back and see what these teams have done. Because the reason why I concentrate on that, Chris, is because you won't hear these names for years, right? We just talked about Kyle Nevin earlier in the broadcast with the Dodgers in the 11th round. You may not hear his name for 6 years. Chris McIlvain, 8th round pick with the Cincinnati Reds. You may not hear his name, you know what I mean? So it's pretty interesting to me to kind of recap some of these Major League Baseball drafts, as the difference being with the NBA draft, those guys either going to be instant contributors or they're second round picks. They may be in the NBA G League most of the year, and they're signed in contracts that don't guarantee anything. So that's a big part of it. And obviously the NFL draft coverage where we do the book. And those are pretty much the things that you're going to get at Draft Nasty, and a lot of videos and video journalistic reviews.
Thanks a bunch, my friend. We will talk to you again when the football season gets underway. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.